I'm Teresa Terry. I'm the director of the Museum of Culture and Environment. I'm also faculty in anthropology, and we're really excited that Jon Shellenberger is here to lead this presentation. He led a workshop earlier, and now he's back in the same place, the same location, slightly different crowd, and on Zoom as well this time. We're so glad you all could make it, and thank you all for coming. And thank you, Jon, for coming as well. And continuing your day. First of all, we would like to begin by acknowledging that we present this program from the traditional lands of the Yakama people. Central Washington University acknowledges the people who have been on this land since time immemorial. The Ellensburg campus is on land ceded by the Cushwanuka and other bands and tribes of the Yakama Nation in the Treaty of 1855. The Yakama people remain committed stewards of this land, cherishing it and protecting it as instructed by elders through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands and give thanks to the legacy of the original people, their lives, and their descendants. We ask those in attendance, whether in person or on Zoom, to reflect on the traditional lands that you inhabit, to pay respect to the original stewards of those lands, and to recognize their continuing connection to them. This program today is brought to us by American Indian Studies, the Museum of Culture and Environment, and undergraduate studies at CWU. Thanks to everyone who collaborated to put this thing together. And thank you, Jon, for coming and being part of our collaboration. I mean, we couldn't do it without you. So this program is designed to generate an open and honest conversation on many topics, some of which may be controversial. We encourage differing perspectives and viewpoints, but we also ask that you treat this topic, the speaker, and each other with respect. There'll be time for questions and answers right at the end of the presentation.
For open and honest.
Okay, yes, okay. So this public talk is called Great Discoveries, and this is Jon, sorry, but this is presented to us by Jon Shellenberger. He's currently the Cultural Resources Department Director for the Cowlitz Indian Tribe and an enrolled member of the Yakama Nation. Jon received his MS in Cultural and Environmental Resource Management from CWU, and is the former director of the CWU American Indian Studies program. So thank you, Jon, and I'll turn it over to you. Let me know if I can help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wait till the end to applaud. If it's worth it, then go ahead and applaud. If not, you can just walk out. So I'm Jon, Yakama tribal member, archaeologist by trade, and father of 3, 2 teenage daughters and a son. So I have stress in my life. Great Discoveries. So this is named after the article that was published recently here at CWU. Those of maybe have seen it or not, covering me as an alumni. Right? I don't speak the language, but is it alumnus or alumni or anyway? I'll get right into it. In case you didn't know, that's me, my fancy shot. Thank you for the photographers. Working at Cowlitz, I do it remotely. So I go over there when needed. And it's kind of a sprawled out tribe all over Western Washington. So we do things by teams anyway. Oversee a language program, hippo program, I've got a carver, I've got a drummer, full-time carver, one of the few tribes in the state that have a full-time carver, and oversee powwow committee, budget, weaver's budget. They put a lot of resources into the culture of the tribe, so it's a very real cultural resources department, not just an archaeology department. And then we have a new cultural stewardship program, which is kind of our archaeological firm type service. I hired Wilbur Barrick, who was a CWU graduate. Trying to think, do I have any more CWU graduates in my department? I don't think so, not yet.
Wilbur counts for 4.
Wilbur counts for 4. So, him to recruit. Usually we do acknowledgements at the end, but I feel like this does 2 things. It obviously gives credit to those who helped, but it also shows you that I did not do this by myself. I had a lot of help. So I just want to acknowledge all the people that have Yakama Nation Tribal Council, Yakama Nation Culture Committee, and the Cultural Resources Program, who were out there helping, but also gave me the authorization to do this work. I was not an employee when I started this work, so I just didn't work for anybody on this project, but they still helped. My wife, Emily Washings, who helps me in many, many ways. She also allows me to do really crazy stuff like this project. And then Steve Hackenberger, who is the granddaddy of them all. Started many, many, many careers in archaeology in the state of Washington, including my own. The Casper family and the Ritaskett family. James Smith, also a Central grad, his thesis is over at the library. It's about Fort Simcoe. It's about boarding schools, and he has been a real asset and a resource for me to tell me what he knows, because he's looked at this not this way. He's looked at this place in great detail. Yakama Women in Trades and the Share Fund, both of those are granting groups that have provided funding, so I could turn around, pay my helpers, and the Cadaver Dog team pay their lodging and their mileage. Yakama Women in Trades helped with paying off some of the GPR. And then obviously the Karen Canine Detection, that's Suzanne Eschel, Guy Mansfield, June Mansfield, Sally Olson, Cindy Arnold, Dan Merrifield, Christine Lesperance, Scott Welton, and Lynn Angelero. And then the dogs, the late Keb, Keeley, Tor, Riley, and Bell. Those are all the dogs that were out there with their handlers. My field crew, Greg, Ilani Ike, Alina Carl, Shane, Mustache Turn Toes, Pamela Harding, and then my daughter. And of course, the 2022 CW Field School students that actually did the first GPR work out at this location. Tammy Ayer, the reporter and historian at the Yakama Herald, and then Ranger out Mark Alvarez, who's out there living and taking care of Fort. So it's a lot of people that have helped in this. So like I said, I don't do this alone. They keep me in line, or I kind of have to corral people. So
I'm sorry, John. There's been a request to speak loud.
speak loud.
Yeah,
Okay,
from
that's all I was
online.
making sure that I needed to project my.
I think you do.
I don't need to change
Thank
my
you.
voice. I don't need to change my voice. Like I said, project my voice. So this all started in May 14th, May 28th, 2021. No, May 14th, 2021. It was my last day at the Yakama Nation. I was kind of done with archaeology for a period. I needed a brain break and maybe a sanity, regain some of my sanity. And then like 2 weeks later, the news broke out about the Cowlitz Indian Residential School and the finding of 215 unmarked graves at a school that I had visited and grown up going to. I mentioned the Ritaskett and the Casper family. Both of those were families of survivors that I had grown up knowing as kind of my aunts and uncles. I didn't know anything about them in their survivor of being survivors of boarding schools growing up. They were just like aunts and uncles to me, and ordinary nice people that were good mentors. And then this news came out, and then all of this information flooded out. And my best friend, who comes from Kamloops, couldn't go back home because the border was closed as a result of COVID. And I wanted to help. I was like, we should do something. So to raise awareness, we put on. It's already over, huh? We put on an honor. We put in a kind of a memorial at the casino outside. And we held a ceremony out there, and then took time. And that, in my mind, popped that question, well, what about our Ford? What about our boarding school? Like, I had heard about this boarding school, I've known about this boarding school in my life. What's going on with that? Where does that fit in the scope of boarding schools and residential schools? And it bothered me. And I wanted to do something about it. So I started the process to get access. So I started what we call a committee action with the Yakama Nation Tribal Council. And I went through that process, and I got approvals to do that work. My only problem is I didn't have a GPR. But luckily I did know somebody who had one. And had been doing GPR work on the reservation as part of his field schools. No, I won't tell you his name, but it rhymes with Schmackenberger. But
The firm Hackenberger.
yeah. So I reached out to Steve, who was doing the field school. I came out on parts of the field school, and he was helping out with work we were doing already on a cemetery in Ellensburg for some unmarked graves. And I pitched the idea, and Steve was like, yeah, let's do it. And obviously he has demands. We finally made it work with the 2022 field school, where I actually taught my first class with CW, at least in my later years. But that went over well. I purchased the GPR unit with mostly my own money. I reinvested. Those of you who don't know, I own nativeanthro.com, which is a Native American retail, like t-shirts and clothing and shoes and suitcases and all of that. So I reinvested pretty much most of what I had into the GPR unit, which is why I thanked my wife at the beginning, because she let me do that. And so we started that work in 2022. And then while I was here at Central, Karen Canine Detection reached out to me. They had saw the headlines, some of the first work that was done, and they're like, how can we help? So I met with them in the spring, and then they did their first of 4 visits out to Fort Simcoe over the next 2 years. So kind of a summary. So it's just a kind of more canine work and more GPR work, spring and fall, over the last, since 2 or 3 years. So Fort Simcoe, when we think about Fort Simcoe, we have to think of it as something different than what it is when you go out there. It is what we would call a landscape of trauma. That is a place that people have experienced significant traumas. And even when it was first turned into a park, there was more trauma, but I can get into that. So first you had the prehistory, this layer. For thousands of years, people have lived there. There is a major spring in that site, and people have habitated that site for thousands of years. When the fort came in after the Yakama War started, 1856 to 1859, that fort was established to keep Yakamas in check during that war. And then after that, Fort Simcoe Indian Boarding School from 1860 to 1922, and then a Paiute presence. So during the Shoshone-Bannock War, Paiutes were rounded up from Malheur Reservation in Oregon and then brought up by foot during the dead of winter in 1879, 1878. Many died along the way. Many died while they were there. And then you have the state park, 1956 present. Now, when I say that there's trauma in 1956, what I mean by that is there's no signage reflecting any of this. That in itself is a trauma because you don't recognize what happened. You're perpetuating the absence of fact. You're basically lying to the people. They acquired it maybe through coercion. The Mulmul Restoration Society, Mulmul is the Indian name for that spring. They were a major organization to push the lease from tribal ownership or tribal control over to state control in 1956. And that was to turn it into a tourist facility and then refurbish the houses. Some of them had been refurbished during the CCC years, but they redid it all. And it was a tourist attraction. And they erased the remaining boarding school buildings and that all of the signage reflected the 4-year period of the fort. There's nothing out there today that says there was a boarding school. There's nothing recognizing the Paiutes. There's nothing recognizing a hanging tree that existed there. To hang Indians during the fort. Now they left that part out of the fort. The whipping tree that existed in front of one of the officers' quarters. None of it. So I think when I think of Fort Simcoe, I think of it as a landscape of trauma with these many layers. And that was critical. I didn't come to that right away. I had to learn about all this while I was doing it. Because when I was looking at the results, I kind of have to think about like, well, we're finding people what do they belong to? Because you got all this stuff going on here and there's nobody telling the truth about it. Everything that's been written about it is basically just a half truth. Who does this belong to? Who do these people belong to? So yeah, landscape of trauma, locations where events have created trauma for individuals and our groups. Fort Simcoe has been a place where trauma of Indigenous people has occurred since the 1850s. So what I'm hoping to do in this research and in this work is to turn that narrative around and raise awareness about these types of spaces that, yes, you can tell the history of a place, but let's start by telling all of the history right next to it. We don't have to erase anybody's history. We can just recognize it all because here we, at least in anthropology, we like to look at all the different truths and try to understand what happens at a site or what happens with the people, whatever your background is in anthropology, whatever the 4 fields you're looking at, you're trying to understand. And we don't throw away part of that information. And here's a real lengthy timeline. I really don't want to go through it. Going from 1805 to the 1960s, there was archaeological work out there. There was all this restoration work to bring the buildings back. And none of it involved protection of unmarked burials. Nothing has been done. Archaeological work to understand what the use of the site was, but that has not been very well preserved. There's still collections, some of which we've gotten back. Just very recently, this work triggered returning some of that stuff, some of those artifacts. So I think one of the benefits of this work has been raising that awareness. The ranger that works out there has refused to regurgitate the same narrative that they've been saying since the 1950s about the fort. He does not share the pamphlets. He does not share the information in the same way. His kids are Yakamas. He's a Mexican of Mexican descent, but he refuses to do it. And so he's taken a stand, even in his position, to not do that, and recognizes that there needs to be a change. Now, who pays for that? I don't know. That's between probably the tribe and the state. So the major problem with Fort Simcoe, it functioned from 1860 to 1922, was we had no living witnesses. So it's as if it didn't exist. People were quiet about it, didn't want to talk about it. They were too traumatized by it. It's very common for survivors of boarding schools. You had people that benefited from the boarding schools and the skills that were taught to them. They benefited because they went along and they got something from it. They benefited from a system that pedestaled them, while also at the same time brought down their peers who did not go along with being Christian or assimilated. It created division between the students, where you had students that were favored and other students that were not, that were punished. Punishment, one of the most common forms of punishment that I learned was very simple. Because anybody guess what that is? Huh?
Corporal punishment, violence.
Yeah, that is, there's something even simpler than that.
Cutting hair.
Huh?
Names changing.
Cutting hair and changing names was the first thing that they did. That wasn't punishment though. That was to change their identity. They stripped them of their Indian name. They stripped them of their physical identity. So the boys they cut their hair and they changed their name. And then they forced them not to speak their language, but they did get a punishment if they didn't. Like if they continued to speak their language, they'd be punished. But if they didn't, pray the right way or kneel when they needed to, they would be punished. And that was starvation. They would starve them. Because once you starve a child, they're easily coerced at that point. These are little kids, 6 years old, 5 years old. So they're very vulnerable to that. And that was probably what contributed to the most deaths, is that you didn't have enough food or nutrition. You couldn't fight off the diseases that were coming at you. Not to mention, they were also in close quarters. They weren't like that before. They were kind of spread out, and they were in their traditional homes. They weren't around the hospital. Here, they had the only hospital was right there at the fort. This is also an agency until the 1920s. So you were right in the petri dish of all the diseases, and they kept all the children together, all the sick kids with the non-sick kids, right? The healthy kids, and then they got sick. The leading cause of death here was tuberculosis, then smallpox, flu, fever, and ag. But tuberculosis was the big one. 3,000 people from the 1880s until 1960s died. Yakama people died. There's only 2 marked burials out there belonging to my ancestor, Agent Jon Olney, my 3-time great-grandfather, who was one of the first Indian sub-agents in Oregon Territory. He didn't marry, he hooked up with my ancestor, had a child, and then he also hooked up with the daughter, his stepdaughter. He pulled a Woody Allen, hooked up with his stepdaughter and had a kid with her. Those brothers are a month apart in age. That was left out of the book called The Name Was Olney, which came out of one of the leaders of the Minimal Restoration Society. He left that out. It's like our branch did not exist in that family tree of the Olney. So I do not exist. I do not count, because if you included that in the book, it would probably look bad on Nathan Olney, who was very good friends with the first teacher and first agent out here at the Fort Simcoe agency, Father Wilbur. He was Methodist. So So another problem, the records for Fort Simcoe, and probably most boarding schools in the US is they're everywhere. There was an individual in White Swan who has an attendance record from 1 year. Like, why is this in the hands of, no offense to that person, but why aren't these things all together? This is a federal boarding school. Why does this exist in somebody's personal collection? And so that's one of them. And I don't have all 62 years of people who have attended here. It's scattered about. There's no record that we could find about any unmarked burials. The only thing we could find was newspaper articles that alluded to the presence of unmarked burials, but they didn't say where. Yeah, there's no central location, not at all. Even the National Archives, that's just one place. You got stuff at Yakama Public Library, and then private collections, probably have stuff at Yakama Nation Museum and Library. It's all over the place. So trying to retrace any of that is very difficult. And any of those written records, the books that were written, all glorified this boarding school and the fort. Many of them were written by my relatives, my only relatives who benefited. They were the ones that benefited in this school. There were some of the ones that were benefited. Nathan Olney and Father Wilbur were friends. And it's credited, Father Wilbur credits him being at Yakama as a result of his friendship with Nathan Olney. Nathan talked him into it. So all of Nathan's kids, my relatives, were all favored. They were they were treated well. And I'm guessing that not everybody got the same treatment. So what I had was death records, but I was only able to get death records for 1 year. I'm a little bit concerned that they didn't keep track of deaths of Indians in the 1800s, because I'm not sure that they cared. The records I had was from 1909, which there was over 30, naming Fort Simcoe as their place of interment. I don't like it either, baby. Then the attendance records, the ones I could get a hold of. So it's very, very sparse. I'm dealing with like minuscule little nuggets at a time. And I never know when they're gonna hit. Somebody will email me stuff or say, hey, don't you know about this? And I'm like, I sure would love to. It definitely points at the need to pull all of this together. Especially if we're doing something on a national level for Indian boarding schools, who's going to put all this stuff together and organize it and go through it? I know I certainly did not want to wait. I couldn't wait. I was willing to do it for free. And it was that important to me. It is that important to me. But it's difficult when you have 3 kids, a full-time job, and you sling purses to women on the side. So some of the fieldwork challenges, rodent burrows are everywhere. Steve can attest to that. That makes it very difficult to see beyond those rodent burrows underneath those features. It kind of blinds you to a degree depending on the size. Wooden caskets don't last beyond 80 years. They're gone. So anything that could hold water or hold something that would provide a strong enough reflection in the GPR results, because when you're looking at GPR results, you're not looking at that fancy stuff that they show you in Jurassic Park. You're that stupid picture that they show of the raptor and shoot a bullet into the ground and you get a nice picture. That's not how it works. You're literally just like looking at hyperbolas like that, and you see a bunch of them, and you hope that those are something. They could be rocks, could be concentration of like water, could be metal. Context really, really matters. And as you've heard, I don't have a lot of context. I didn't have a lot at all. So can anyone guess what my next step would be? If I don't have context to find these humans. I gave thanks to them already. Anybody want to take a guess?
Dogs.
The dogs. The dogs. We rely on the animals. And their strong scent. And that's, Steve turned me on to that idea. We used Pamela Harding came out. Then Suzanne and her team came out. We relied on that and said, let's put them to work and then build off of that work. So that work is still, the cadaver dog work is done for now. And so we have kind of that foundation of where to start. So we had over 40 indications of throughout the park of human remains by those dogs. 40 different spots. And based on that, we're going to do more work and continue it. But we're looking at 196 acres. Not all of it is, not all of it we can GPR because the conditions aren't right. It's very rocky in places. There's a lot of tree cover, a lot of oak out there, really old oak. So it's not all accessible. It's not doable. But there's a good part of it. So 190, so I calculated it out. Like a good contract archaeologist. 1,982 20 by 20 meter grids. Steve and I only do 20 meter by 20 meter grids. You do any more than that and you screw up. So 1,982. We only do 6 a day. So that's 330 days of field work that it would take to do all of it, if it was all accessible. That's not including the interpretation of all of that data. And the cost estimate for that, $3,000 per day, is $990,000. That's if you're including the interpretation. That's part of it. And then if it's $10,000 a day, then it would be 3.3 million. And this is an unfunded project. The federal boarding school, yes, they did the reports. Yes, there is an apology, but there's not been an allocation of any money to try to resolve this problem for identification. In fact, there's been very little discussion publicly or that I've heard or seen about trying to identify unmarked graves at any of the Native American boarding schools. I know it's listed in the report as a priority, but nobody's moved on it. Everybody that's doing this in the US is doing it independently of one another, and we're lucky if we get to connect. There's work that's happened in Chemawa. I know there's work at Colville at the Pascal Sherman Indian School. There's been work, you probably may have seen work in the paper on 1 near Leavenworth. Carlisle Indian School, I believe there was work. They're actually repatriating people from Carlisle and putting them onto the reservations where the tribes want them or feel that they belong. Others want them to stay. So this is all free work. So in my work, we had to do some grids that we first started due to technical problems, but we did 24 with my GSSI Sur 4000, so it's a 400 megahertz antenna. Grids were scanned on the east and west sides of the park. So near my ancestors' grave, way on the east side, and then kind of near where the boys and girls dorms were on the east side or on the west side. There were some very strong signatures naturally around where the boarding school houses were. We had done some work when I worked at Yakama Nation for some monitoring. There was some ground leveling in between 2 of the houses, and also they were providing some stability to some of the houses because there was some settling. But when they were scraping off soil in their recontouring, there's tons of nails. And then outside one of the officers' houses, there was a ton of shards of plate. So whatever happened there, It was either a fight or a really big party, but there was thousands of shards of plates outside of a window of an officer's quarters. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, there's nails all over this place, so. There's definitely a chance, a high probability for a lot of metal being around here. We did see a slight depression near in between or near the church and the girls' dorm, and I'm pretty sure I have the girls' dorm identified, at least the foundation or some type of signature that it left behind. So now to find the boys' dorm, and we can start building the map of the old building. So that it gave me some hope about trying to map out all of the different other buildings. So again, they did not document all of these houses. There's not a real firm document of like the Smith, the what do you call it? Blacksmith shop, the place where they made the flour, because they were putting kids to work. This was a fully self-functioning boarding school where all the labor to sew the clothes and for the food and everything, all the kids did it. Father Wilbur didn't get the resources he needed, so he stimulated them by putting them to work, by learning how to farm, how to be blacksmiths, or how to lay brick or carpentry, like Jesus, you know. That's how he ruled over those kids. So there's more work based on some interesting results of the dogs that we'll be doing perhaps this fall, maybe winter, spring. Some dogs hit on some spots that like 3 or 4 dogs hit one spot. They went crazy for one spot, so we're gonna go and focus in on that hopefully soon. Okay, so what can we say about this place right now? Based on available records, students died here, based on the death records, based on oral history, based on articles, based on everything we can get our hands on. Yes, they died at Fort Simcoe Indian Boardings. Based on the death records, yes, there are unmarked graves out at Fort Simcoe. The cadaver dog work for sure is giving us alerts over a lot of different places. Do we know which context they belong to? No, we don't. That's the problem. And that's what the unique part of this project that's probably different than the other boarding schools is that you have all of these contexts going on all at once. And it's not, the soils are not very deep in this part either. You're right up against the slope of the Cascades. And then you have water going throughout. It's pretty shallow, so you probably have context digging into other contexts, especially with the modern work that's been done at the fort. And so some of the death records do indicate Fort Simcoe, although I found that some of those actually exist in another cemetery. So there has to be verification by me that it, you know, are all of those buried somewhere else? Are some of them? Like, what's the deal here? So we have to do some paperwork and some field work to identify if those people are buried there or if they're buried at what we know now as the Methodist Cemetery in White Swamp. And was there multiple Methodist cemeteries, because there was 3 Methodist cemeteries in history. Father Wilbur built 2. There are 2 native ministers. The fathers are George Waters Squire, and then I'm gonna blank on his name, but there are 2 native Methodist ministers, one in Medicine Valley and then one in White Swan. And then there was a 3rd built in another location, in Sadis, which is near Granger. That is now the Sadis Shaker Church now exists on those grounds. So I have to relocate some of these old cemeteries or these old Methodist churches to see if there's any associated cemeteries there. And this isn't counting the Indian Mission School that came in after 1922. This was another Christian school that came in after. My grandma attended that one. But we haven't even started on that. Causes of death, not all of them are known. The two that I do know about are, it says unknown. I don't know how to take that, but I note it as a possible pattern. The people that those, from 1909, the people who died that year or had death certificates that year, the headmaster or the head of the school was particularly cruel, and he was let go. And he likely did not file under the death certificates, which is why we have a big clump of about 30 death certificates in 1 year, all filed at about the same time. I don't think 30 people died all at the same time. I think the dude didn't do his job and he was being a bad dude. He stayed there for a few years. So another thing I have to look at is how many evildoers were there working there. And yes, disease was definitely a factor here, especially in the late 1800s, where you had several epidemics roll through. On top of the starvation, the crowded conditions, the one hospital to serve the whole reservation until about 1909. So yeah, very poorly funded. Father Wilbur, for his term, did the best he could with what he had, but I'm not sure that the conditions were well enough to fight off the epidemics that swept through there. Yeah, these are just some of the statistics. 1882, there was about 3,400 of us, and then by 1900, there was 1,900. So, is that a reflection? Is that an error, or is that a reflection of the epidemics that swept through there? That's a big loss. Tuberculosis killed 619 people. I'm not sure that's accurate. There might have been even more, because we were, like I said, 1880 to 1960, 3,000 to 4,000 people. We were not a huge tribe back then. We're big now, but back then, you know, everybody knew everybody. It was pretty small. So yeah, there was a whipping tree that was removed, and then a hanging tree. That some of that had been maintained through oral history about its location. That was torn down, and a children's playground was put over the top of that location, which I think was rather charming. Luckily, the children's playground has been moved in the last 10 years. Yes, we've identified the sites. There's definitely challenges, and there's much more work to be done. My recommendations are to change the signage, have it reflect more of a what I say, a trauma-informed landscape, to reflect all of the contexts there. I think the Paiutes that passed away here and the children that passed away here should be afforded some respect and honor, you know, for what they experienced. This place needs a management plan. I'm thinking like an archaeologist now. How is the state going to manage this into the future, given the unmarked burials and the detection of by the cadaver dogs throughout the park? How do you manage for that? You want to change your sprinkler heads or change your electric? You need electrical change, you know, infrastructure changes. How do you manage for that with what we don't know? And I think this is a good example of what kicking the can down the road does. You ignore parts of history, you're just going to do it all over again. And yes, U.S. government should pay Yakama Nation at the very least for capacity to do this work on their own and not rely on mystery. And to be able to train there. And that was my goal, wasn't just trying to solve this mystery, was to get other people to do this work. So I don't want to do this till I die. I would like to retire and take a break. I know Steve, I don't know. But you know, it's important that we pass these things on to our younger generations, take them up and let them know the importance of doing this work. And those who are passionate about it, everybody who has helped has been passionate about helping. And I don't turn away people. Like, if you are crazy enough to work with me, yeah, let's do it. And nobody's crazier than Shane. And so, yeah, a lot more research to cross-verify. Obviously, a lot of field work and paperwork, and it's just endless. But I'm hoping to, at least, I know my wife and I had talked about writing this up as a case study for Evergreen, as, you know, maybe an example of maybe what not to do or what to do. Because nobody seems to be writing about it or talking about it as much in the US. It's definitely a topic in Canada. But I think we're too quiet about it. Too quiet about it. Any questions?
That's Shane off in the wheelie.
I know, he misbehaves when I don't. So I splurged. It's one of the weekends we worked. Yeah.
So I'm sorry. So people on Zoom, if you have questions, if you could put them into the chat and then I'll ask them for you.
Is the goal to try to identify the actual bodies or just to identify that bodies?
Identify the location. I don't, with our beliefs about burials, I think we just leave them in place and don't bother them anymore. And if I get a cadaver dog that hits and I get a GPR reading that hits, I'm going to call that, and we're just going to say, go around here, don't dig there. And if we get enough of those, we'll fence it off. I don't know what the management strategy is, because nobody's done that like this before. This is new, unprecedented. This is a problem we've never tried to solve because we never thought of it as a problem. So.
Well, I think Eastern Europe has taught us a lot because they have sound mass graves.
Well, yeah,
And maybe some lessons
very
from their experience.
very difficult to. We're in a very different context than Eastern Europe. Yeah, yes.
So people who want to help with this work, how do they connect with you?
You can contact me. I've been sending him to Shane. He knows how to get a hold of me, but you can contact me. I should have put my number. I'll get it to you. If I put it up here, everybody's gonna have it on the internet. So let's get afterwards. Yeah, Rodrigo.
Thank you so much for sharing this. This is heavy. This is
I feel it.
yes. This is unrecognized work, also unpaid work, and yet you take a stance. You have chosen to take a stance, right? And even though there will never be full resolution, right? Because this context, unlike the Canada context, is more like the mission system in the Southwest, right?
Yeah.
You have multiple peoples being clumped together into a single traumatic landscape, and we're not gonna be able to discern who's who, right?
Right.
Just to acknowledge that they are there.
Yeah.
I think that I just want to recognize that you being here today is placing that first sign of saying this is an acknowledgement that this happened here, and that's huge. But this is science that is not just knowledge for the sake of knowledge, right?
No.
This is you using what you know and what you learn to take a stance and use science for good, for make a difference.
Right.
What can you tell about the young people here about why that matters? Why is that important to do, to take a stance as a community?
I didn't set out to do like advocacy archaeology at all. I just rather stay in my little cube of comfort. But you know, maybe, yeah, that's a good question. I like to think it matters. Hmm. I would say. I wouldn't do this if I didn't believe in it, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that didn't really believe in it. Because, you know, it hasn't been without, it hasn't been without, sorry, my throat is chopped. It hasn't been without, obstacles, disbelievers, haters, naysayers and deniers. You have to really believe in this. You have to really believe. And when it comes to natives, nobody's going to believe what you say. They only want to see numbers. They only want to see. They only want to hold the bones in their hands. Show me those dead people. I don't believe it. Show me that they were killed. Show me that there was wrongdoing. They're not going to believe your oral history, even though it's the oldest data set in the United States. Doesn't matter. They want hard facts, whatever that means anymore. They want numbers, they want it, a picture. And even then, pictures are open to interpretation. You have to believe in it. And you're in yourself and in your work. Nobody else has to, but you, because you're carrying. And I can't say like, yeah, pick something you love and then go after it. And, you know, you can't control what other people are gonna say about you or what they're gonna do to you, but you have to control how you react to it. So, you know, because you can be the best scientist in the world and they're still gonna question you, especially if you're an indigenous person, because it's like, well, you're just a native scientist. What do other scientists say about this? Yeah. So, yeah, we'll always see things through an indigenous lens, therefore it's less than. Yeah.
Kind of following on that. Well, how do you think, so with the Governance and Executive Order 2510, he includes in
You're
that.
lucky I read it today.
There's a part of it that calls out that traditional indigenous knowledge should be treated as equal to scientific knowledge.
We have, so Bulletin 38 covers traditional cultural properties. It covers basically landscapes that are important to indigenous people that are not necessarily archaeological. Although I'm not saying that archaeology is important to natives, but even written in 1990, you have professionals in our field that don't know what to do with it. So now you're telling them to use a data set they've never been taught to use, don't know anything about, and they're bombarded with it. We are now at a time where, yeah, indigenous knowledge is hip. You know, we'll say, yeah, we'll pay for it. Yeah, let's give them money and we'll get it. What are you gonna do with it? It just sits there. Nobody taught you how to use it. Nobody taught you that system of learning. We live based on a system, on oral history that has evolved with this landscape for thousands of years. Everyone else is not. They are new to this continent. And they work from a different paradigm. So now our paradigms are like meshing together, trying to mesh them together with professionals that have no idea how to do that. So it's in our education system that has to change. It is lost on us. That law is not for us. This work is not for us. The apology from Biden is not for us. It's for the future generations to be able to look back and say, hey, the government cared enough to apologize. I don't, I'm glad he apologized. I'm glad that the reports are written. But, I spoke with people at lunch. I've said this, that that teriyaki is driving. You know, our kids deserve to not know this as a reality. Our great grandchildren, our grandchildren. My children know both sides of that apology now. I know both sides of the apology, the reports, the apologies, all of that. Yes, thank you. But you're describing a reality we've been living with for hundreds of years. You know, this is up to the future generations to be able to not be touched by this stuff, traumatized by this stuff. And Indigenous knowledge and how to incorporate it. I mean, it says in the thing in the 2510, frequent and often consultation. So just call.
Yeah.
And recognize, sorry, Governor, recognize that these are unfunded mandates for tribes. And I appreciate it. But it's going to, if it multiplies all of the consultation that our tribes get, it's like we're 2505 or what was it, 2102 has already flooded us. And now it's like not only are we getting more, we are extracting from the tribes, possibly. And for, you know, and most of the tribes are broke right now. So it's free data mining. That TEK is free. It's expected because state agencies don't have the money to pay for all of it. Just for little snippets for their little projects within their budget and their time. So, and I'm not saying it's not a perfect system. Where we have to, this is the rules of the game. So, all right.
Jon-
Describing the helpful.
We have some questions online.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of them is, what are ways to get the state more involved?
Who's asking?
Casey, what?
Is it anonymous? Is it Bob?
Oh, state parks.
It just says, the state.
Well, state parks knows what I'm doing.
Mhm.
They're probably listening in or they'll be watching this. They have stayed out of my way. And been quiet. They're not hosts because they're leasees, but they've been good guests. And they have shared information with me that they've had about the fort, which, you know, gave some light to some things, but you know, state's gonna do what it can do at this point. But I know that they wrote the report recently. I know there's a lot more research behind the AG's report. And I don't know what they're gonna do with that research, but they have done a lot. And I know this is not, they're also looking at what is going on with the missions, the Indian missions, that are even older. Because we had an Indian mission here in Manastash Creek. Steve knows about it, 1840s. Cowlitz mission, 1830s. Yakama Mission in the 1840s, 50s. Well, there's several iterations of the Yakama Mission. So there's Indian mission system. So all of these colonizing forces going on, state's just part of that. So I gave the recommendation, they need to consult with the Yakama Nation on revamping their interpretation of that.
Can I give you okay.
You said that coffins last about 80 years. How long would bones last?
Depending on the soil. Nikki's not here. How long do bones last, Steve? Depending on the soil. Yeah, what? Depending on the soil.
Any sort of
Yeah, it's in what? The thousands of years. It probably they're gonna last longer than wood.
Oh, okay.
Most of, yeah, I mean, we get faunal material that's thousands of years old. It's not unheard of. So yeah, it's not, it depends on the soil, but it's not like wood. So made of carbon. Okay, yeah, so it's all right.
I was wondering if the Asian forum,
for restoration, were they in contact with anyone, like outside of state, maybe, like, for like contacts and record? Just like, you know, how the, school operated with like, you know, if there's anything that, any events that may happen?
Yeah, I mean, the records, you know, like correspondence, like from Father Wilbur to the federal government superintendent, right? Some of that's at the Yakama Library, some of it's at National Archives. Some of it's probably in boxes in my cousin's house because he wrote his master's thesis on it. Like I said, it's everywhere. It's not very convenient for a researcher. Like, we're used to researching, just going over here to the library, getting our book, and then, you know, it's like, well, professor said I had to get 10 books, so I'm gonna get 10 books, and that's it. No, you're lucky if you get one that you really want. So I've not found a smoking gun to say, oh, here's the Fort Simcoe Cemetery. No maps. I've seen a bunch of maps of Fort Simcoe. No, that's my stupid great-great-grandfather. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You, may have found evidence for the foundations of the old buildings. Why would they be buried underground like that? Would they be?
I'm not sure that the ground grows over because it's grass.
Like erosion?
Or, no, not really erosion, but the grass grows over. And there's, you know, I don't know all the different function of soil that happens out there, but I mean, there might be settlement, there might be water that floods a certain area, so there's erosion. They might have bulldozed earlier on to kind of cover up some of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's the foundation, but it's definitely a signature. Linear features show up pretty well in the GPR, and are usually man-made or woman-made people, or they made. Yeah. So that's one nice thing about historic features is they show up like a Christmas tree. This a line is not natural in nature. We like things in squares, which is totally unnatural.
I have more from online.
Yeah.
If you can. Okay, so do you have buffers around areas where no digging should be done based on your work? Also, is the state aware of said buffers?
I am on a call. I get phone calls about this. Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, thanks. Have a good day. I get calls on this from state parks. Just to back in. So, yes.
Can I ask you another?
Yeah, go ahead.
On here, okay. Let's see. There are quite a few on here. Okay. What motivates you to continue this work, and how do you navigate the heaviness of these findings and keep the engagement and awareness? How can we inspire the younger generation to continue to find the truth?
Insanity. I think the drive just not to make it my kids' problem or my grandkids' problem or other people's problems. And then the processing part, artwork. Artwork is a big thing. Like I said, I do a retail thing, so I put all of my stuff into artwork, or I escape from it. I don't know that any of my artwork really reflects the trauma of this work. I just really use it as an out. Like beadwork, I can just, I'm gonna go to another place. So thank God I had a good art professor.
Can I do another one
Yeah,
from here?
just keep-
Okay, I'll just keep rolling. John, sorry, technical question. Can you give us a sense of the correspondence between dog hits and positive results from the DPR work?
We have actually, we've been working independently with one another. And I'm running on my own hypotheses, and I don't know if I'm just kind of staying away from it. Didn't want to interfere in their process. But I want to hit all of the spots that they've hit, and I haven't been going over those spots. Because we've been doing it simultaneously.
So I've been working on another set of hypotheses, like I ran lines off of Nathan Olney's grave, so it's like, well, dead people are buried with other dead people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there were a lot of hits in that area. So far, no. Mainly it's because we have not been working in the same. I shouldn't say we haven't been working in the same spots, so I haven't been GPRing in those hot spots yet. So, yeah, so this is not the end of something. This is not the results of something. It's the ongoing work or the progress of ongoing work, field work. So, but I thought it was important to let people know. I've been quiet about it for a couple of years. So. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Good.
Okay, this is the last one so far. Hearing what you are saying about giving equal credence to traditional oral history and science, how would you recommend someone who is starting to do this work ensure that they are doing that? As a student, I have read the material given to me in order to pass the classes. So is it just a matter of being hyper aware of what I'm reading, as well as seeking out as much understanding from Indigenous perspectives?
Yeah, I don't know if this person's an anthropology major. I don't know, but I Tracy Andrews, God bless her. She taught me to look at the sources and then dive into those sources and go to the primary source and then go into the notes. So if it's anthropology, if it's based on anthropological work, ethnographic work, go to the archives and look at the notes. Look at the context of the work, that was being done to collect those oral histories, if that is indeed what they're studying, rather than just looking at the regurgitated, product of a modern professor. You kind of have to go and be a good researcher, and go to the source, because I work for the Cowlitz. I'm part Cowlitz, and so there was a lot of anthropological work done in the 1920s. One of my ancestors was an informant for Franz Boas to a degree. He recorded some music or some songs from her, and then Thelma Adamson, Franz Boas's teacher or student, did work and recorded oral histories from my great-great-grandmother and her sister. That's written in a book called Folk Tales of Coast Salish. Is a combination of Chehalis and Cowlitz oral histories, because Cowlitz were recognized they were living on Chehalis. And one of the things I tell my staff is don't go off of Thelma's work. Look at her actual journals to see what the old lady said. My old lady being my grandma, I can call her old lady, but look at what she said and look, because I think there's more context there, and usually is more context there. Because Thelma would, those anthros, they weren't writing this for us Indian people. They were writing it because we were going to be gone. So it was entertainment for the masses, right? It was like, look at these Indians who will be gone in a generation, wrote, but they didn't do this thinking it actually would have meaning. And we would use that work by our ancestors and turn it around and protect sacred sites. We thought we won. Another one.
Yeah. We could do
Can I
this.
ask, what do the dogs do? How do the dogs help?
How do the dogs help?
Yeah.
They help identify where the presence of human remains. So within 2 or 3 meters.
How do they do that?
They're very strong nose.
So,
They're trained for historic human remains.
oh,
One of the things that I know we're trying to understand is that the combination of the soil. Are they smelling the soil? So if a bone touches the soil, it's churned up and then removed from its original context. Are they still getting the scent from the soil, or are they getting it from the bones? And that's one of the things even the dog handlers are trying to understand. So might be doing some testing by taking some soil from a place that dogs hit have displayed at a location, taking soil from that, putting it on another location and seeing if they do the same thing too. So maybe we know, is it the soil? I think it's a combination of both. Because, you know, you look at what's going on where they're pulling DNA from soil now. In archaeology, this is kind of new, cutting edge, and you know, nobody's a believer of the new stuff, right? But it'll be standard work in another 20 years. We'll have little DNA guns and say, oh, there was an Indian that was right there. You know, but I think it's both. I think, you know, we believe that when we touch that soil and we don't mess with it. We don't mess with the mussel shell middens, because mussel shell middens are just the byproduct of stuff we ate. So they put it in their mouths and they got saliva on it. We don't keep dishes that dead people ate with. We don't keep the sheets. We don't keep the clothing. We don't keep that stuff. We get rid of it. We burn it. So there's a cultural belief about those things, about marking or leaving a mark, me leaving a footprint there. And then now it's looking more and more like there's a scientific corroboration of that belief, which is usually always the case. Just takes science a little bit longer. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thanks so much for your contribution. I had a question about, so I'm an English professor, thinking about art you do and the kind of narratives around these things. And the ways that sort of you know, if you think about a lot of horror stories told in the United States or set in the United States, they're always like Psycho or even this Dairy Show, you know, they're always set on Indian burial ground with that idea, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about how that obsession with sort of the ghost stories and the haunting of indigenous peoples here in America, how it changes once we start telling these stories with more accuracy and marking off these grounds and getting the past, the sort of these traumatic sides and hopefully trauma, the respect of them.
And didn't Stephen King like rip off ideas about, I mean, like The Shining and stuff? He's always kind of borrowed.
Right.
You know what's weird about Stephen King? Is this is totally whatever, but
A lot.
but that in the Dreamcatcher when he
Right,
does that thing to find things, that was actually in that motion to find someone was actually in an ethnographic text with bushram tales. So with our people on the Columbia River, when there, I forgot what being it was, but this being did that. He was trying to find, Coyote was a trickster in our oral tradition. And he did that. And it described, he whirled his finger and then in order to find Coyote who was hiding. And I was like, I wonder if he found that obscure passage in that ancient, in that old turn of the century text and ripped that off. It's just a little too coincidental for me. So that was my only option to ever tell that story.
So clearly they're borrowing a lot, right? The new show, they brought in cultural.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's totally fictional, but they're like saying how.
Well, yeah, you said the Choctaw and in what's it, the Sinners.
Right.
Choctaw, and it was like, we're out of here, it's dark, which, you know, it's technically like native belief, like it's dark, we're not messing with the dark, and what the dark carries. So, and there's beliefs about that. We don't whistle in the dark, we don't eat in the dark, we don't do certain things. It's dark time, we don't go visit the dead in the dark. When, as soon as noon hits, we don't go to cemeteries. So, anyway. Go ahead.
A question. Yes. Okay. What is the mindset as an Indigenous person in the field when on a search for burials?
Well, we mainly tell jokes. I maybe we're just too traumatized, or we don't want to think about the work when we're doing this work. We try not to think about it, I guess, or get into it. And so we're usually talking about other work or people, usually gossiping. There we're gossip, do we? Just a positive, come there with a good heart. We let them know. We did like a small ceremony when we started. Council did a ceremony as well. Just to let them know that we don't mean them any harm. And And that we're coming there to try to help. And so they'll know that we're not strangers. So I'm definitely not a stranger. But that's one of the things that I do when I go out. Try not to spit on the ground. And no eating around the dead. Not every tribe has that belief. I've learned that recently, but yeah. Keep your hair covered. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's it. That's
Okay.
it. Somebody said, thank you for sharing this info.
Thank you.
Yeah.